Hey, all you ungrateful little shits out there. I have an idea. How about today we learn to say a little thanks, to feel and embrace and express gratitude for the people and things in the life, world, and all that we have. With us today is the gratitude psychologist, Peggy DeLong, to share with us the science and strategies of gratitude. Short, simple practices toward a more grateful you. Today, we're going to talk about gratitude and some tools or gateways or exercises to help us get into that state. But I'd also like to talk about what gratitude is, the phenomenology of it, the neurobiology of it, looking at it from different aspects. Because I think by understanding it in these other ways, we can also find other sort of portals into this state beyond the 5 exercises that you've provided for us. And we'll get into those exercises and more. But let's start with, what was sort of the shift for you from being in a sort of ungrateful state of existence into a life of more gratitude?
Sure. It was a big shift for me. I really consider having been myself an ungrateful teen, an ungrateful young adult. I grew up in an area with tremendous privilege. And as many young adults do, I was so busy comparing myself to other people and feeling ungrateful for what I had. And it took tragedy in my life to discover the power of gratitude for myself. And then it was transformational in improving my life. And it's unfortunate that it took tragedy for me to get there, but now I'm grateful that I live a more grateful life. And when I say tragedy, what happened was that my fiance was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of cancer 3 months into our engagement. And when he took a turn for the worse, the doctor said that there was nothing left that they could do for him and that he was going to die. And it was in those last days of his life when I knew he was going to die. I just didn't know when. So every day was so incredibly unpredictable. I didn't know if he'd be able to open his eyes and look at me that day. I didn't know if he'd be able to speak my name that day. I didn't know if that was the day he was going to die. Every day was so incredibly unpredictable. But one thing that brought me comfort that was predictable was that I could get myself a cup of hazelnut coffee. When all of the visitors would leave and I was allowed to stay, that simple cup of hazelnut coffee brought me so much comfort and got me through the worst days of my life. Now, my 26-year-old self had no idea that what I was doing was practicing gratitude for predictability and for that predictable cup of coffee. Now it makes sense to me, now that I understand the science behind the power of gratitude and how something so simple can be so incredibly powerful. So that's what transformed my life. And I always like to say, don't save gratitude for your good days. Gratitude is truly most powerful on your worst days.
I'm curious about this pre-gratitude life. You said you were ungrateful. I think by highlighting what it's like to be ungrateful, or maybe the neurobiology of it, maybe what's causing it, like you said, having a life of privilege, etc. Maybe we can get into that side of the story, which I haven't heard from you too much yet, and as well as maybe what's going on in our mind and body when we are ungrateful.
For me, it was really one thing, and that is the comparison, the tendency to compare ourselves to other people. As Theodore Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy. And we can feel so happy with what we've got, but as soon as we compare, it brings down our happiness level. And I was doing it consciously. It was all over right in front of me. So I just did not appreciate the life that I had. So, for example, just one thing that always comes to mind when I think about this is I shared a car with my 3 siblings. We were all in high school at the same time. And my father bought an old, a rickety, rundown car for the 4 of us to share. It was so old and rusted out that you could actually see the road through the rusted floor in the passenger side. It was an old car. Yet some of my friends were driving to school in new BMWs, Jaguars, and all sorts of very nice cars. So it was just difficult to appreciate what I had when there was such a contrast to what else was out there right in front of me. And that is my biggest regret, is that I didn't appreciate what I had, that I had that car to drive, and that I didn't express my gratitude for my two very loving, hardworking parents.
Yeah, so maybe this is something we can kind of do today is we're using the word gratitude, but it sounds like there are lots of other words we can use to express sort of the same thing that might resonate more with others than others. And what comes to mind here initially is kind of this feeling of having versus not having, or having enough versus wanting more. So even going back to that, when you're in the hospital and your fiance was dying, you were losing something, you were losing him, but you had this cup of coffee and everything that went along with it, the warmth, etc. And I guess you're just focusing on that, and you did have something, and maybe that was enough. So maybe, yeah, maybe you could talk about from this aspect of having versus not having, or any other perspectives of this.
Well, and that's what gratitude does. So a simple definition of gratitude is it's being in a state of appreciation for things that are tangible and intangible. And I like the added definition that it puts us in such a state of appreciation that it makes us want to return kindness. And I really believe that that is what it's all about, that returning kindness and the expression of gratitude, not keeping it to yourself. And when we focus on what we have, it simply takes the focus off of what we don't have. We can't simultaneously be thinking about both. So when you're thinking about what you are grateful for and what you appreciate, at the same time are not thinking about what you don't have. And it really fosters that feeling of enough. And part of that is what happens in our brains. One of the neurotransmitters, when we think about appreciation and gratefulness, when we're in a state of appreciation and actively thinking about it, it releases serotonin in our brains. And serotonin is that neurotransmitter that provides us with that feeling of enough. We get a similar sensation after eating a great meal or watching a good movie or having a nice conversation with a friend. That is serotonin, and it's related to a feeling of enough.
Okay, so yeah, we can talk about it from the neurochemical aspect too. Maybe gratitude is a large ingredient of it is serotonin, at least from the neurobiologist perspective or something. And another thing about serotonin is I mean, I guess with oxytocin too, it gives us this feeling of we're not alone, we're connected. So maybe when we're ungrateful, thinking back on my own life, maybe you do feel a little bit disconnected from not just people, but maybe nature, maybe it could be God, it could be the objects around you, like the cup in your hand. But yeah, another sort of kind of distinction could be, and the serotonin you brought up kind of brings this up in my mind now is, yeah, this feeling of connectedness versus being alone.
And when we express that appreciation, we feel less alone. And the great thing is that expressing appreciation for another person is one of the easiest ways to improve your own mental health. So often we think about the benefit for the person and for the person who's receiving the appreciation, and that's wonderful. But the research shows that it really boosts the mood of the person doing the expressing. And when we do so, a couple, really nice things happen. So the other person feels good, we feel good, and it fosters that closeness in a relationship. And this is so powerful because the number one predictor of well-being is our human relationships. So any time that we spend cultivating our relationships is time well spent. And when you're expressing appreciation for a person in your life, you're doing two things. You're having human connection, and it's in the context of gratitude. So it's like a double dose of goodness.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We use this word gratitude, and some people are like, "Oh, gratitude." I'm also kind of worried when people see the title of the episode. They're like, "What is this podcast? Some spirituality podcast? What are you doing?" But this is also why I'm talking about it from this perspective too. It's one of these words that has some baggage to it, and now by looking at it from all these other perspectives, serotonin having, not having, we can start to see, oh, it's really just a shift in focus. It's a sort of a perception shift. And another kind of way of looking at this could be too is like the feeling of being positive, feeling positive versus feeling negative towards the world. And it's kind of funny how we could just through like these exercises you give us of saying thank you, or looking back on our day, what went well, or setting intentions, different things like that can shift our focus so powerfully into not just feeling gratitude, but I mean part of that is feeling more positive and hopeful towards the world.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much research about the power of gratitude for fostering a positive mindset, for building resilience, for fostering a sense of peace and that hope that you just talked about. One of my favorite researchers in the area is Sean Aker, and he did a study using a gratitude journal. And he had people use a gratitude journal, and they previously had rated themselves low level pessimists. And simply by using a gratitude journal, they were able to rate themselves as low level optimists. And these were older men who really did not believe that a simple gratitude journal could change their perspective of the world. And it absolutely did. It truly is one of the simplest things that we can do to feel good in the moment and change the structure of our brains to become more positive thinkers.
Does the object of our gratitude matter so much? You were grateful for this cup of coffee, and I'm thinking, how kind of precise do we need to laser beam the gratitude? I mean, you could just feel it in a sort of general sense, or then you could think it, then you could write it with hand, or type it, or speak it, or be very precise. How does the object, and I guess now I'm getting into the method of expressing it. How do these two things matter? The method probably matters more than the object, but I'll let you get into it.
Sure. Well, as far as the object, what I love about gratitude is your brain does not care if it's considered something small or huge. Those are just human labels that we put on things. Your brain does not care if you are experiencing gratefulness related to a simple cup of hazelnut coffee in a styrofoam cup or a wonderful house that you're living in. So that is really neat about the science of gratitude, that the object does not matter. And then as far as the method, there is some research that shows that certain methods do make a difference. For example, if you're going to keep a gratitude journal and you're just staring at a blank page, it's much more powerful if you write about something different every day. So, for example, if you write about your best friend one day, then for the rest of the month, challenge yourself to think about other things to write about. Don't write about your best friend. That helps you to scan your environment for different things to be grateful for rather than the one thing repeated. And then the other factor that makes it really powerful is getting specific, getting into the why. So if you write about your best friend, write about the why. Is it because she keeps your secrets, gives good hugs? You've been friends for a decade. Like, write about the why. And the research shows that it's much more powerful to pick one or two things and get into the why rather than a long list of 10 or 20 things. And the reason is because the more that when we get deeper, we can experience the feeling more, where the other is more of a cognitive exercise. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't have power. When we make a list and we challenge ourselves to make a list, it helps us to realize, oh, wow, we have all these great things to be grateful for. But we're not connecting as much to the feeling, where getting into the why and getting into the specifics and the details helps us more connect to the feeling of gratefulness.
Okay, yeah. So speaking of feeling, how does a state of gratitude affect our feeling or processing or experiencing of things like emotions?
Well, it helps to cultivate positive emotions. As I spoke about serotonin before, the other neurotransmitter that it fosters is dopamine is released from our brains, and dopamine helps to elevate mood. So when you think about what you're grateful for, it instantly helps to elevate mood, and it can be just enough of a shift to have a better day. Because what happens is when and our emotions are so connected to our thoughts and they gain momentum. So we can go down a negative spiral very quickly, and the same thing on a positive way. When you're thinking about what you're grateful for, it helps to send your energy and your thoughts and your emotions in a more positive direction. And it doesn't need to be huge. It can be just a little shift to have a better day.
Yeah, because like you were in that hospital room with your dying loved ones. Actually, your father also died shortly thereafter, and there were certainly some negative, what we call negative emotions involved in that. But somehow that cup of coffee and other things you're grateful for, not maybe only made you more aware of your emotions, but also it seems like kind of shifted some of these negative ones into more positive ones, or these negative experiences more precisely, or maybe framed in a more positive light.
For me, the way that I look at it is that it helped me to feel my pain at a deeper level. Now, that might sound a little bit strange. Like, why would I want to feel emotional pain? But I have always intuitively known that as part of being healthy and human is to embrace all of my emotions, including the painful ones. And that was a painful experience, but I didn't want to be stuck there all of the time. I needed something to help me get through it all. And that's where the gratitude and other methods of positivity help. But so they were methods after I allowed myself to feel, and it made everything more tolerable. But I knew intuitively that in order to get through all of it, including after his death, I needed to grieve and grieve deeply and face it head on. But then I was comforted to know that I had methods to not get stuck in that emotional pain. And gratitude was one of the most powerful ways to help me to move forward.
So it's also sort of shifting your awareness or presence. I guess kind of putting you in this moment, and maybe it's kind of like what Eckhart Tolle was talking about in his book, back in the day. But yeah, and then maybe when you're grateful, you're not in the moment. You might be in the past or the future or something like that. So wow, this is also kind of I know I keep going into different perspectives on this, but this is kind of fun for me to kind of get a bigger grip on what gratitude is. But also, these are other gateways into it. Because, say, for example, you can maybe read The Power of Now, and then by doing those exercises, you might feel more grateful. Or if you go into nature and feel connected or have social connection, you might just be going there for the social connection, but then you start feeling more grateful. Or if you start looking at what you have, putting your body in a serotonergic state, maybe you'll just start feeling grateful, even though that wasn't the goal. So this is kind of why I'm hitting it from these different angles. Is by starting from these points, you can also maybe it could be gateways into gratitude. But yeah, my earlier point there was though, yeah, this shift in presence of looking at things from the past to the future versus the now.
And that is what gratitude does. It helps us connect to our lives. It's for very busy people. It's one way to kind of slow down so it doesn't feel like your life is whizzing by. It helps you to be more present in your life by paying attention to the great things that you have going on.
So it's also kind of a time perception shift. How does it? You just touched on it, but maybe dig deeper into how it shifts our perception of time, and also maybe how when we're ungrateful, how we experience time.
Sure. So when we are conscious about what we have going on and things to be grateful for, like happiness, many people say that happiness lies in the present moment. That when we look back at things, we can sometimes feel, experience regret. When you're looking too much toward the future, it can cause worry and anxiety. But when you are in the present moment, like that is peace. And thinking about what you are grateful for in the present moment in your life helps you connect with your life. It helps you to be more mindful, and it helps to highlight the things that are going well in your life. And it simply starts as intention. It really needs to be a conscious choice. I mean, some people become like, for me, I didn't think about becoming grateful in those moments during tragedy in my life. It wasn't a goal. It just kind of happened out of necessity. But sometimes the way to get there is through conscious effort, and then doing a practice on a regular basis. It becomes habit. And then that habit over the course of time becomes a way of life. And that's where I'm at now. I don't think about being grateful. I am grateful. It's not a practice so much anymore as a way of life.
Yeah, but I was trying to do this last night. I was like, okay, be grateful. I was doing some of your exercises, and it was sort of hard. It wasn't easy. I'm almost like kind of thinking, yeah, easier said than done. You say just do it, but I'm like, I can't. My body and brain is not in that state. But it sounds like, yeah, maybe that's what it is. In the beginning, it's just kind of hard, and it's like a practice, and you keep going and keep going, and I guess it gets easier over time. But yeah, you just set the intention, and maybe in the beginning, it's just not. It's not going to be as easy.
Right. It isn't as easy as people might think it is, which is why many people give up, particularly with gratitude journals. Staring at a blank page can feel very daunting, which is why part of the reason why I wrote one, to give people a prompt to take yourself off the hook. You don't need to come up with it. I provide the writing prompt, and then people get into the details and the why. But that is a very common experience. And I think so often we're judgmental of ourselves that we're, doing it wrong or right. And there really is no right or wrong. And to keep it simple, simple is available every day. So I always like to encourage people, what simple things do you have in your life that you might be taking for granted? Running water, a bed to sleep on. Start with those things. As I mentioned before, our brain cannot tell the difference if we are practicing gratitude and feeling gratefulness for something so simple that we might be taking for granted.
How about like the number of things to be focus on, to be grateful for in the moment? I used to do this exercise. I would be like, I'll think of 10 things I was grateful for this day at the end of the day. And it was just like overwhelming. And I would just give up on that exercise. And also it would just be like a kind of blast through them. So I wasn't really even feeling grateful for them in a way. I was just kind of trying to get my chore done. And then as one of your exercises is reflect on the day and think about, well, I'm already going to answer it for you. One or two, maybe one simple thing. Yeah, how many things should we focus on during each of these gratitude exercises, and why? I think the answer already is one or maybe two. But what's the problem with focusing on too many?
For simplicity, I think that if we overcomplicate it, people are likely to give up. So intentionally keep it simple. For example, at bedtime, you might be tired. You don't want to make it a huge cognitive exercise. It's a feeling exercise. So think about one thing. And sometimes thinking about what you're grateful for might feel strange. So a simple changing of wording can help. For example, reflecting upon the day that just passed and what went well, encouraging yourself to think about what went well, and then feeling grateful for what went well. So rather than just starting and thinking about, what am I grateful for right at bedtime? Just changing the wording a little bit can help facilitate some thinking, and keep it to one thing, one simple thing, and getting into the details about that one simple thing.
Okay, so yeah, that another way of framing it is like I've already kind of mentioned. Instead of saying, "Hey, I'm going to do my gratitude exercise in the morning or at the end of the day or whatever," I could be like, "I just focus on what what did I notice today? What happened? What did I have? What was? What did I feel?" And just kind of just dig into that experience and be like, "Oh, it could have been something very simple. You saw a bird just fly in the sky, and you're like just looking at that bird in your mind, or you had that cup of coffee, or you just put your feet on the grass and you're just like remembering that moment. So it's like appreciation for life in a way too. It's just like, oh, this simple moment in life, you're not zooming past. Instead, you're like, let's just sit here. So like sort of stillness in memory, but also maybe the more you do this, probably I imagine you would throughout the day when you're not doing your exercises, you might kind of start to appreciate life a little bit more too.
That is the really cool thing that happens over time. You start to appreciate life more for the simple things. For example, today I was speaking with a client, and she just within the past couple weeks started a gratitude practice. And she noticed that she was appreciating how her dog was wiggling on his way inside from a break playing out in the snow. And just the way her dog wiggled, she was appreciating where the dog did that every day, but it was like her eyes opened up a little bit to her life, and she appreciated the dog wiggle. So that's just one small example of connecting to your life and appreciating things that your brain might tell you it's silly or it doesn't matter, but it absolutely does. This really keeping it simple. It helps us to connect to our lives. So the first time you're doing a gratitude practice at bedtime might feel a little bit strange. But what I think that what the beauty is the next day. So when you do this on a regular basis, what happens the next day when you know you're going to hold yourself accountable at bedtime, you will actually become more present in your life. You will notice more things, more good things that are happening because you know you're going to hold yourself accountable at bedtime. It's like you're looking for them. And then when they happen, they're highlighted for you. You experience them on a deeper level, and then you get to re-experience it at bedtime by recalling that nice thing.
Yeah. So this is going to be changing a lot of things in your life, your relationships, your job, your finances, your actual health, the state of your nervous system, etc. But what is our body like? Say our heart, our muscles, our breath, these things like, you talk about serotonin in the brain, but maybe we could talk more about what's happening in the body when you're feeling grateful versus not grateful.
So when we think about what we are grateful for, it relaxes our muscles, it relaxes tension, and that is part of serotonin doing its job. So it's also, that's another reason why it's a wonderful thing to do at bedtime, because we might not even realize that our body, our muscles are tense. And by thinking about what you're grateful for, it just releases the tension, the muscles relax. And the research shows that this simple practice at bedtime significantly improves sleep. There was one study that looked at 400 adults, and they did a simple gratitude practice at bedtime, and 40% of these adults were diagnosed with a sleep disorder. They had experienced such difficulty sleeping that they sought assistance of a physician, and they were diagnosed with a sleep disorder. And they did a gratitude practice at bedtime, and they reported statistically significant improved quality and duration of sleep just by thinking about what they were grateful for at bedtime.
Yeah, and then that'll have, cascading effects the next day because when you feel better and you're more relaxed, been sleeping well, etc., you'll probably naturally feel a bit more grateful and present, and it'll be easier to do these exercises. So it's sort of a upward spiral in a way.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Sleep is connected to everything, and one of them, the biggest ones, being mood. When we get a good night's sleep, it just helps our day start off on a elevated mood. We have better frustration tolerance, more patient, better concentration. So much is connected to sleep.
Another one of your exercises, well, we talked about the evening kind of exercise. One of them, you also have one for the morning, a simple saying thank you in the morning. Can you talk more about this one?
Yes. So this is a simple 2-second exercise just to say thank you out loud. And this is an exercise that I heard many years ago by Wayne Dyer, and I loved its simplicity. And the reason it's so powerful is because all of our lives, we say thank you for positive things. So our brain automatically gets primed for positivity. And this is really powerful for people because if you're going through a difficult time, if you're experiencing anxiety or depression, it can feel the heaviest when you first wake up in the morning. About 75% of people with depression have difficulty getting out of bed. And for people who are experiencing anxiety, it can feel the heaviest when you wake up in the morning and the to-do list and all the negative thoughts rushing in. And simply by saying thank you out loud helps to shift that. It helps to shut down the negative thoughts. And it also is really helpful if it's paired with right away then getting out of bed. So say, don't linger, because that's when these painful, unpleasant emotions tend to fester when we don't get out of bed. So the idea is to say thank you out loud and then to get out of bed.
Yeah. And then paired with that is your other exercise. There's five of them. We'll list them out later. But let's do like this for now. Is setting an intention for the day to be more grateful throughout the day. How do you set this intention? What does that mean? You just like say it to yourself, or you think it? It's a bit vague, but I think you'll kind of clear it up for us right now.
Yes, setting an intention can be done so many different ways. It can be written, it can be a thought said out loud. But in the context of what I call the grateful day, which is these 5 exercises, it can be quiet self talk. It does not need to be out loud. It can be self talk while you're in the shower, while you're brushing your teeth, just a simple statement to yourself. I'm going to be more aware of my blessings today. In whatever language feels good to you, whatever you would use. I'm going to be more aware of the good things going on in my life today. Simple as that. And it does not need to take any more time because you can do it while you're washing your hair, brushing your teeth, an activity that you do every morning. So you can attach it to an already existing behavior so that it doesn't take any more time, and then you'll remember to do it.
And your big shift for this was death and loss of love, and you're losing a lot of things actually. I wonder what it is about death or huge loss. It seems like it has to be kind of huge. Like little tiny losses don't quite trigger it naturally. You said we can intentionally kind of, try to be more grateful. And that works, but sometimes it just, life forces us to be more grateful, and death is one of those things. And I guess simultaneously, somehow that warm cup of coffee was also one of those things. Together, they did the trick. What is it about death or loss? Looking back on that experience, it just happened to you in the moment. But now I think you've had time to reflect on it. And what do you think was going on there?
I think about this a lot and I'm really not quite sure, but I'm just grateful for it because it completely changed my life. And I never imagined that years later I would, it's been 30 years for me since the deaths of my fiance and my father. I never imagined not only would I continue to be practicing gratitude, but that I would be talking and teaching and writing about it. I never knew back then. It just, I just feel like it was a method just kind of shown to me by some, I don't even know where it came from. It just naturally evolved. Probably because I just love coffee. Coffee has always brought me comfort, but there was something about being in that hospital room with the sterility of the room and the quiet after people would leave, the smell, like just it was so cold, and the contrast to a very aromatic cup of coffee. It wasn't just any cup of coffee. Hazelnut has a strong scent, aroma to it, and it just the contrast, I think, was what was so striking to me.
And then, in the weeks following, your dad was starting to die. How did this death of your fiance kind of shift your experience with your dad in his final weeks?
Well, I was so grateful that during the last weeks of my father's life that I was living with him. So after my fiance died, I couldn't bear to be in the apartment that we shared. So right away, I gathered up, all my belongings and moved back home, which was only a half hour away. So I was able to keep the same job, same circle of friends, and it was so comforting to be with my loving parents. And my father was very healthy. He had had some heart trouble years earlier, but we didn't know that a heart attack was brewing. And, they say that some people die of a broken heart. I truly believe that part of the stress of the loss contributed to my father's heart attack. And it really came out of nowhere. He went on a ski trip and he was alone on a chairlift when he had a sudden heart attack and passed away. But the really amazing thing was that just 2 weeks prior, he told me that when his time came, that was exactly the way he wanted to die. I will never forget the conversation. We were sitting in my bedroom helping, each other to process our grief. My father was a psychiatrist, so he was really good at processing feelings and getting deep into meaningful discussion. And so we were talking about our grief and crying. And then he just shifted the conversation and said, if I have it my way, I'm going to die on a chairlift. And I said, Dad, that's morbid. I don't want to hear about it. But why a chairlift? Maybe you're skiing and you hit a tree, but at least you're skiing. You love to ski. And he said, No, that's where I feel most at peace, breathing in the cool mountain air. I want to die on a chairlift. And I never imagined that 2 weeks later, that was exactly what would happen. But we couldn't control that it happened. But knowing that that was the way he wanted to die when his time came brought my family so much peace. And then I shared on social media with an Okemo Facebook group where he passed away. Someone within the group, 28 years later, this was just 2 years ago, somebody reached out to me and said, Did you know that the meaning of the word Okemo is all come home? And I was just blown away that that was the meaning of Okemo, all come home.
Yeah, so I mean, he was dying, but he was feeling grateful for that. He must have loved skiing, and I mean, sitting on that ski lift might have I don't know him, but maybe it felt like a cup of hazelnut coffee to him, and maybe these exercises might also, in a way, I mean, I haven't died yet, I don't think, but they might prepare us for death in some way because we start to focus on, oh, how do we want to live? What do we love? And we probably start doing more of the things we love and living in a more kind of authentic life, and then we do die one day. So I guess the odds of us dying during a beautiful moment, doing something we love, increase rather than us dying, sitting in a train or a office desk or something.
Well, one thing that absolutely these deaths have done for me is to live my life more fully, to create meaning in my life, to change my pain to purpose, to help other people with what I have learned, to make sense of it, so it wasn't all in vain. So my fiance, he was so young; he was only 27, vibrant, lively one day, and 7 months later, not there. So I know, and then with my father, he, waking up one morning and going skiing and then not coming home. I know how quickly life can change. And this happened within 6 weeks. My mother and I, we started 1994 celebrating, planning my wedding. And then by the end of 1994, we were two young widows. I was 26 and she was 52. I'm now 56. I'm older than my mother was when she became a widow. And I just, we were living together and it was a really, really dark time. But once again, it was gratitude for what was going well in our lives and the love that we had for each other as for our partners who passed away that got us through, and being grateful for the time that we had. Now that doesn't come right away. The grief can be so heavy you don't even want to think about what you're grateful for, but that came in time. And then as it slowly, as I allowed more gratitude in, I embraced it and it helped me even more.
Yeah, and you do, or you have done some work with the widows and widowers. And actually, my dad also, he runs this Facebook group for widows and widowers, and he goes to these conferences and stuff. He's a widower. My mom died a few years back, and he's also shared some of the big struggles, especially for the widows, but the widowers too, the men, but the women have especially tough times with this. But yeah, maybe you could talk about how do you sort of tailor these exercises or this information for people who've lost a husband or a wife or perhaps a child or someone who's lost somebody very important.
Well, it has to be done very carefully because if somebody is not ready in that space, it can feel almost like a slap in the face to be introduced to the idea of gratitude when you're in deep grief. But sometimes, just contemplating it and feeling a little bit lighter helps you to realize that it does help and then makes you want to continue to do some type of gratitude practice. But I always give people space that if it arouses a painful feeling, then they're simply not ready.
Yeah. But at the same time, you have this exercise of turning emotional pain into appreciation. I guess we should, before we do that exercise, we need to make sure we're in the right state. We're in a safe place to do it. It's not too painful, perhaps. But yeah, let's talk about how we can turn pain into appreciation and how our perception of pain might change the more we do this.
Sure. And it takes time. It wasn't readily available to me, but it is something that people can access eventually if they're open to it. And what I mean by using your emotional pain as a trigger to practice gratitude, it's always important to feel the pain first and not to use gratitude as a method to not feel. It's so crucial, especially with grief, that you feel the grief in order to heal. But of course, we don't want to get stuck in that emotional pain. You don't want to feel down and just, grief stricken all day long. So gratitude can be used as a method to elevate your mood and move forward. And I talk about 3 specific ways to do so. And one many people are familiar with, and that is to look for the silver lining. So within your difficulty, within your pain, in that moment, and what you're going through, what is one positive thing that you can take out of it? What is one silver lining? And for me, before my fiance died, everybody came to his hospital room. He had friends from high school, friends from college, my family, his family. His room was filled with people who loved him. And he looked around his room and said, "There is so much love in this room." I will never forget that. So that's my silver lining, that I know with certainty that he felt our love before he died. That's a silver lining. So look for one positive thing that you can take out of an awful experience. But sometimes the pain is too heavy and you can't do it. And that's okay. Let yourself off the hook. Another idea is to look for how you might be learning and growing. What is a lesson that you can take within this pain? When I was going through my grief, I could not find any lesson. I was just too grief stricken. There was no lesson. Now, years later, I absolutely know what some lessons were. And now I'm sharing that with other people. So it might not be immediately accessible. It might happen 5 years later, 10 years later. But at some point, that finding the lesson and the growth is how people can turn post traumatic trauma into post traumatic growth and then share that with other people. But once again, that might be too painful and too hard to do. So then I recommend that people try this last method, and that is to look for a positive value. What is the underlying positive value? For example, if it's grief, a positive value is love. So somehow love was violated. That's why you feel the grief. So uncover what that positive value is. If you're experiencing betrayal, the positive value that's been violated is trust. So you wouldn't be experiencing the emotional pain if there wasn't a presence of a positive value that's been violated somehow. So the task becomes, and it could be different for every person. The task becomes for you as an individual to find for you what is that positive value that's been violated, and not just stop there. Then somehow be that positive value by the end of the day. So if it's love, what is one simple loving act that you can do? If it is trust, what's one trustworthy act that you can do? We can't control what comes our way in the world all the time, but we have 100% control over how we show up in the world. And it's one way to use our emotional pain to not get stuck there and to feel better by uncovering the positive value and then being that value.
That might be another fun exercise to add into this is like do something that you would be grateful for. It's kind of the whole like treat people how you'd want to be treated or the golden rule type thing. And then maybe just by doing something kind, that might also spark some of this. Of course it would.
Oh, truly. And I believe that what we put out in the world comes back to us, maybe not immediately, but eventually. So it's one way that you're benefiting the world, but then ultimately benefiting yourself as well.
Yeah. We've talked about some of the triggers or exercises or gateways or whatever into gratitude. What are some of the things to go into the other state? We don't want to intentionally become ungrateful, but we slip into it, especially in this modern life of all kinds of stuff. There's technology, there's cultural beliefs and different things. What are some of the common sort of pitfalls or ways we slip into feeling ungrateful?
I would say the number one way is comparison. That you can be happy with everything that you've got going on. You can truly be happy and grateful. But then when you compare to someone that you perceive as having more, being more, having accomplished more, it instantly brings down your happiness level and the gratitude for what you've got going on in your own life. And it also can foster jealousy. And the tough part is it's a natural human thing to do. In fact, Leon Festinger is a psychologist who developed what he called social comparison theory, that it's part of childhood development that we learn our place in the world through comparison with other people. But at some point, it starts to tip the scale and make us feel bad about ourselves. So I believe that the goal isn't necessarily to shut it down completely. I think that's unrealistic, but instead to use it to your advantage. So when you are comparing yourself to somebody else and you feel whether it's jealous or upset or some type of emotion, that's telling you something. That's telling you that something's important to you, and to you that if somebody else has something, then it's proof that you can have it too. And it's also showing, it's like shining a flashlight on what's important to you. And to go, if it means something to you, then it's worthy of going after. Just as an example, I love to ski. I love the snow. I'm not a beach person. If somebody has a beach house, like that doesn't, I'm not jealous. I'm not envious. I do not want a beach house. But if somebody has a beautiful ski house in the mountains, that gets me fired up. And I've learned to use that to my advantage to work toward having that, not to make me feel bad about it, but I pay attention to that emotion. That's something that I want, that I would love to have for myself. So rather than making it make you feel like something you don't have it highlight to you for you and be a motivator that you can, if it truly is something that you would like, you can work toward that too.
Yeah, this is interesting because if you think about well, I don't know exactly what's going on in the brain, but I imagine that when you're comparing yourself to others, you're feeling like you don't have enough and they have higher status than you. So then that's naturally going to decrease things like serotonin, and it's going to increase maybe dopamine to get you, pushing further into the future of seeking more. Dopamine is useful to get us into, to change our life, but it's also a very stressful state to be in all the time. And yeah, but it also kind of gets me thinking, because there are these benefits of seeking more and wanting to become more. How do we kind of balance feeling grateful and everything's good, I have enough, versus wanting more and wanting change? Can you like kind of flip it on and off in certain moments? Like, okay, today I need to, it's kind of a sloppy question I'm throwing out here, but would there be any benefits to kind of turning down the gratitude at some moments?
I would say to use your emotions as your guide, like when it's causing you to feel bad about yourself, that is when it's time to focus on what you do have. That kind of is showing you that you're tipping the scale a little bit more and going and being out too outward focused at possibly what other people have. And it immediately reminds you of what you don't have. Where a simple way to feel better is to just bring it back to yourself and what you do have. And then to build upon that. It's hard for us to be motivated and do the things, any type of goal achievement activity when our energy level is down, when our mood is low. It's really hard. So, one way to instantly elevate mood and do what will help you achieve your goals is to practice gratitude. It instantly elevates mood, it helps you connect with your life, and it can provide you with just enough of an energy boost to do the very thing that you need to get to toward that goal.
It's also nice because basically anybody who's alive can do it because there's something that everybody has. I mean, you at least have your breath, or you have life, or you have a lot of people have food. Most people have water, but maybe not necessarily. But everyone has something because you have life. So it's something in your control. You can do this. Whereas when you're outward focused, of course, that's a bit of a challenge because you can't really control a lot of the stuff out there. So it's another exciting thing about all this gratitude stuff is something you can do every day. These exercises you've given us, basically every living person can do them. That's a pretty amazing little toolkit.
Yeah, absolutely. That is part of the beauty of gratitude is that it's always accessible to everybody, and including for people who, I've heard stories on various podcasts and things of people who didn't have running water, but then they focused their gratitude toward rocks and being grateful for rocks. Like we really can train our brains to be grateful for the simplest of things.
What were some of the other things that emerged for you? You started with that cup of hazelnut coffee in a styrofoam cup, in a styrofoam cup of all cups, but it's enough. It's enough. What were some other things that kind of became highlighted in your life as like, oh, I really love this thing, or the reverse? Oh, this is I don't love this thing. Let's remove this thing from my life. What were some of the changes that happened over the weeks, months, and years following all that? As you now you're the gratitude psychologist, so you're probably you've crafted probably quite the life for yourself.
Well, for me, it highlighted the power of relationships. I've always known that, I feel good with good friends, always. But then, I've always been a giver. But this was a complete flip where I had nothing to give anymore. And it was instead an opportunity for friends to give to me and for me to get more comfortable with receiving. And and just really appreciating the friendships and the people that were there for me in various ways, where some people it may have been a walk, other people it was food, just people showing up in so many unexpected beautiful ways. So it really heightened my level of appreciation for all relationships, not just close friends, but all relationships. And and now, the research shows us that that really is what is so powerful about, just well-being and happiness, all of our relationships, including strangers. So in my work with people, I encourage us, everybody to not just consider family, friends, and close people in our lives, but connecting with complete strangers. That this is truly one way to help with the loneliness epidemic. It helps us to feel seen. It helps us to feel part of our communities and the world when we are out and about in our daily lives, connecting with complete strangers.
Yeah, like what we're doing right now. I mean, in a way, we are strangers, but I love this. This is one of my favorite things in life is just like having this experience with a stranger, basically, and we're trusting each other in a way. We're connecting. We're respecting each other. We're looking at each other. I mean, through a camera, but doing what we can. It feels especially nice almost to do it with a stranger because you're like, wow, how beautiful the world is when even a stranger will.
Right. But somehow most people tell themselves that it doesn't matter, or it doesn't matter if I don't talk to that stranger, or they don't want to hear from me. But it absolutely does matter. In fact, I use a saying. I say there's no such thing as small talk. It's all talk. And then using the acronym ALL to remind people of simple things to do to connect with a stranger. So the first A, the A in all, stands for anything. Talk about anything. It doesn't matter if it's the weather or the traffic. It doesn't matter. Talk about anything. Just get a conversation going. The next L is for learn. Ask a question. What is one thing that you can learn about that person? And then the last L is like. Give a compliment. Everybody loves a compliment. It's a wonderful way to make a connection with a stranger is to give a compliment. So using that acronym ALL in the context of strangers, so there's no such thing as small talk. It's all talk.
Perhaps this also improved your relationship with yourself. You say you like to be in solitude here and there too. And then with nature, with the mountains specifically, I imagine it also helped nurture those relationships as well. It may perhaps even with animals or plants. I don't know. The people seem to be the big one. That's what we really need and I love. I mean, I notice whenever I'm alone versus deeply connected. I went back home. I live in Japan. I went back home for a month, and that was a whole different feeling. Even though I was eating all that junk, pure junk, I felt healthier somehow. I mean, yeah, because I was with my family.
Yeah, well, there's something to be said about loving relationships. But the one thing about relationships is we can't control them. We have an impact on them, but we can't control relationships. Where that's where I love where nature comes into play. Nature is so predictably healing. And you don't need to do anything but just be in nature. And that was also one of, being in nature still heals me today. But during my grief was really instrumental in my healing was spending time in nature.
And nature always loves you back. It's so, like you said, so predictable. It's like a nice puppy, but nature's the best. It always loves you back. Whereas people, it's kind of high risk, high reward type thing. Where nature's just like a stable source of love.
Absolutely. And I could get into the science behind that. I mean, I love learning the why behind things. So I study the why. I like to make sense of it, particularly so for myself, but also because it is a human tendency to discount the simple things. So people might say, "Oh, it doesn't really matter if I don't spend time in nature." But it absolutely does matter. And when you learn what's happening in your brain when you spend time in nature, it makes you more inclined to do so and to not minimize the power so that if you do have a few free minutes, you are more inclined to actually go outside in nature than let your brain take over and tell you that it doesn't matter, that it absolutely does matter.
Yeah. You're also a big public speaker, and public speaking is one of the big fears. So, how has this gratitude stuff changed your fears, or how can we use these to maybe decrease or deal with some of our phobias? I imagine it makes those better too.
Well, the funny thing is, it still is a fear for me. I don't know. Sometimes I ask my family, I often question, why am I doing this? I I still get incredibly nervous and I really wonder, why am I doing this? But then afterward, when one person comes up to me and says that my story made a difference in how they feel and what they're going to take into their lives, then it's all worthwhile. It's worth all the nerves and practice going into it having an impact on somebody. And I know there's more people. They don't all come up to me afterward, but just one person makes me feel like it's all worthwhile.
No, yeah, this makes me nervous too. It's like, oh, it feels like I don't know, people are listening, and you can't really undo it, and we we don't want to mess up. But when you're done with it, you're like, oh, even if it wasn't perfect, you're just like, ah, what a great. I can't stop doing this, but why do I put myself through this? I don't have to do this.
Right. And what helps me with that is focusing on the message that it's not about me. It's about the message that I want to help and get out into the world and to help people who are hurting.
Yeah. You also use certain objects to trigger some of this gratitude. Namely, you make these gratitude bracelets. Why do bracelets work, or what do you love about them, and what are some other objects we might use aside from things like bracelets?
Well, what I love about the bracelets is that they are so visible. So when it's on your wrist, you just can look right down and see it. And I got the idea after my fiance died when somebody gave me an angel bracelet. And that is what I wore back to work after my leave of absence. And it brought me so much comfort to have this simple bracelet on my wrist. It reminded me of my fiance. I felt the love of the person who gave it to me it just brought me comfort. So that is part of why I make a gratitude bracelet, came from that experience. And I make gratitude bracelets as well as gratitude bracelets for grief and loss. So I have a variety of bracelets that people can pick after a loved one has passed away, so, to give to another person who is grieving, because I know how much it helped me.
And these are on your website, I imagine, or?
Uh, yes, yes. I have a separate website. I have a different company called Love in a Bracelet. So that website's just loveinabracelet.com.
Okay. Yeah, maybe before we leave, we can just kind of go through the five exercises. I know there's more that you do than these. You also have the four P's: prioritize, plan, practice, prosper. We didn't get into that too much, and there's lots more you do. But yeah, maybe since we did kind of get into these today, a very easy question for you right now. Yeah, what are these sort of five exercises?
So we went over one already. That's simply saying thank you out loud when you wake up in the morning. Exercise number 2 is to set your intention at the beginning of the morning to be more aware of your blessings during the day. So that's just some self-talk in the morning. Exercise number 3 is to reach out to one person every day and express your appreciation for that person. It could be via text on a very busy day, or if you have more time, a really nice, thoughtful, handwritten gratitude letter is really powerful. And then exercise number 4 is to use your emotional pain as a trigger to practice gratitude. And that's where I talked about the silver lining and the growth and uncovering the positive value. And then exercise number 5 is when your head hits the pillow at the end of the day to reflect upon your day, think about one thing that went well for which you can be grateful. And then all 5 of those, even on your busiest day, does not need to take more than 5 minutes. And I call that the grateful day.
Yeah. And I'll just add into those some of these other things we've talked about, nature and sleep, and I think by doing some of those things, you might help with these exercises. But that's sort of my little addition to this. If people want to connect with you or get your books or any of that, where can they go?
I think the best way would be if people are interested in learning more about the Grateful Day. I have a free resource. People can just sign up on right through my website, drpeggydelong.com/the Grateful Day. And when you sign up for that, each day I deliver one email getting into one of the 5 exercises to support you in putting that exercise into action.
Okay, great. And I'll also link up your Instagram and LinkedIn too, if that's okay.
Sure. My Instagram is the.gratitude.psychologist, and my LinkedIn is just my name, Peggy Doherty DeLong.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for this. I'm grateful that we were able to do this. You know, you have a very busy schedule, but you still make time for strangers like me. So I appreciate that. Yeah, keep up the great work, and thank you, Peggy. And yeah.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. Thank you, Michael.